Okay, just in case people later wanted to know about it. So I can't see you as well. That's the hard part. I teach actually on Zoom with my students and I don't see them, or it's all audio and video, so I don't get the full feedback, but I'm hoping that you will enjoy the photos. I did not take most of these photos, so please not think I'm this talented of a photographer, but I think the visual of this will help you. It's not a very positive, unfortunately, because you can see the title of it is Birds on the Brink, specifically 389. But I think the goal that I want to achieve here is that you are going to be able to know how to help these birds, because remember that it's not only birds, it's other wildlife, it's us included. One phrase I always say is, what's good for the birds is good for us. All right, so I went all the way to the last slide. All right, I'm already having technical difficulty. All right, let's try this again. I did not want you to see my ending. All right, so number 1, there we go. So there's a few takeaways for tonight, and just to kind of start off, why birds? You know, you might be in here because you are an Audubon member or you like birds, but one of the amazing things about birds is that they personalize and just localize climate change. We can see what's going on with climate change because of what they are showing us. The term that we use is they are indicators. They are indicators of the health that ecosystems have and that we share with. So we're not only in a bird emergency, we're in a people emergency. What birds face, we face. Our children, our grandchildren face. This emergency is what we choose to do about it, is theirs to inherit. So remember that we are making decisions that could impact our future children, future grandchildren. So we really need to make action and take action. So I'm going to go over the report, and some of you might have received this report. If you're a National Audubon member, you get it in the magazine, but also there's an insert that came in, but maybe it was too much science, so I'm really just trying to make it make sense for you. So the first takeaway here is that the numbers, we're seeing that 2/3 of North American birds are at risk for extinction from climate change. The second takeaway is that there is good news, because even though we know this evidence that's backed by science, we do know that if we take action now, we can improve the chances for this large amount of birds at risk. There's also a website that I'll show you with pictures, because it really shows you how you can see how the birds in your area and also migrating to your area or our area can be impacted. So we can see how we can actually help them specifically. The next takeaway here is that you'll see me describe some of these climate threats. So I'll describe them because we hear some of these things. We hear birds are at risk, but we maybe not understand why. Or you're trying to explain it to someone and why they should make changes in their life, but you don't really have a way to explain it. So this is where I'm hoping that I can give you some of the basics so you can actually help back up your points. So people like evidence. We might not hear it all the time, but science is helpful to back our evidence. So what you'll see is I'll describe 2 temperature changes. 1.5 degrees Celsius, and I'll convert that to Fahrenheit in a little bit, and then 3 degrees. And of course, we don't want it to get to 3 degrees. So Audubon basically gave the good threat, if we had to, 1.5, and then worst case scenario threat. So you can see here, it's a big difference. 305 bird species will face 3 or more climate threats, which are examples are fire, sea level rise, and heavy rain. But if we only, and try to not exceed 1.5, you can see only 34, and that's still 34 that could be affected. We really don't want that many. I'll talk about how virtually, and sadly, every bird species will experience some kind of climate change impact. State birds, 1/4 of state birds could actually lose the majority of their range if we reached 3.0 degrees Celsius. So here, you can check out this beautiful great egret here. What we already know, we already know what we need to do. We just need to do it. One of the key things is to actually protect the places that birds need. So habitat, we need to preserve habitat and protect it. So they have it when they migrate through. We also need to take personal changes, but it's not only at home. We need to actually try to urge our state and federal levels. You might be one of those who constantly email or write to your legislators, but we need to get more people to do this, and we need to explain why. Because as I said, what's good for the birds is good for people. Okay, how I know this is happening. This is my little daughter, Willow. She's 2 years old. And this is actually a recent picture. If you get the Journal Standard, you might have seen her in there. I took this photo. I did notice that her pinky finger is in front of the lens. So she might not be looking at a bird. She actually might be looking at her daddy right now for the photo opportunity. I'm thinking you're laughing right now. I can't see you, but those who have met Willow, you know she's wonderful. Her first word was actually bird. I'm not joking. I did not prompt it either. We just had a lot of birds in the house. And her second word was book, and my husband's a big book lover. So it was basically mommy and daddy. But how I know this is happening, I've been in the bird business since I was in college, and not to give all my years, but basically I've done bird counts, Christmas bird counts, birdathons, and I've seen change. I've seen where there's less bird species of some, there's more bird species of others. Unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot more of the non-native bird species, so they're doing well, but our native ones might not be. I'm seeing climate or weather conditions that are just different. I mean, look at our past few years. I've had a flooded basement 2 years in a row, so you can see that in the past that might not have happened. So we're definitely seeing some impacts. And what keeps me up at night is worrying about this girl's future. I want her to have the beautiful earth that I had, and I want her to be able to enjoy, and you probably be thinking the same thing with your family. Okay, so I'll kind of slow down with the science part. Basically, Audubon, they looked at a database. They have a huge database of bird observations, some of them that you actually might have helped with. Scientists compiled, I have some numbers next to me, 70 different data sources, including eBird. So I don't know if any of you use eBird. A lot of people like eBird because they have it on right with them and they can plug in and see where a bird is. I personally don't use eBird, but I know there's a benefit because it does plot the data and we can have records of it. Then Audubon scientists also looked at other climate-related threats that include fire, heat waves, early spring, and I'll define all of these if you're not familiar with some of these terms, sea level rise, and they basically, what they did is they took all these threats and put it onto a bird distribution map, and they can identify how and where these birds have been impacted. And they plotted it with different degree temperatures and can actually extrapolate the data. So this is really the first time something like this has been done, and who's better to talk about birds than Audubon. The other thing that we look at is, you might have heard a report done before, I have the date later. There was in an earlier edition of an Audubon magazine, and they described since 1970, we have lost 3 billion, so that's with a B, 3 billion birds have been lost since 1970. All right, so prior actions have put birds in a bad situation, and Audubon study is to hopefully look for how we can fix this in the future and make more conscious efforts in conservation issues. So this map here, so as I said, the Audubon took a lot of information, but you can see the numbers here, 140 million observations from the US, Canada, Mexico. It's the most significant bird observation data that exists. That's the basis of their foundation of this work. And this little map here kind of shows you a snapshot of the 10,000 of the 140 million records. They put all these dots on here just to show you where this data has come from. 70 different data sources and 604 bird species in North America. So I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers, but it's really just to more amaze you at how much data they actually compiled. It's not simply just saying climate change affects birds. They want to really back this up with data. And if you look at the bottom there, if the font's not too small, you can see they worked with the US Fish and Wildlife, US National Park Service, and then, I mean, even citizen science could be in there.
Our screen seems to have locked up, so hopefully we'll get back. I'm gonna pause recording.
Get back. You know what, I'm gonna keep my screen off because I wonder if I just have too much internet using. So you're gonna be looking at the screen anyway, not me. So that might be better. All right. You can all hear me again?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So here we're looking at a few buzzwords. So scientists are combining the bird observation data set with projections for climate for North America. Then they're including seasonal specific variables for summer and winter. So I'll only show you one season, but if you go to this website, which I'll show you in a little bit, you have the ability to click summer range and winter range, so you can actually see what is affected for the birds. Then the next little picture of North America, you can see they're going to use variables such as human land use. So they're really focusing on the fact that human use or areas that have been converted to agriculture and urban areas, and then how that affects vegetation and how that's going to change. Now you might be aware of our state nickname, the Prairie State, and I don't know if you knew the numbers. It's always amazing when I read it, but the Prairie State, it used to be covered with 22 million acres of tall grass prairie. 99% of that is lost because of farming and plowing and development. So we really only have 2,500 acres of true prairie remaining. So those of you who help with stewardship at the Elkhorn Creek Biodiversity Preserve, we're thankful. We have had this preserve for 20 years, and that is one of those few remaining little areas where we see these birds using this habitat. In fact, we just counted the 500th species, which is such a big milestone for that preserve. So that's what we need. We need more habitat to be preserved, or at least reestablished, because it really shows that these birds are using it and it's something good for them. Okay, so then you can see here vegetation I described, and then just the overall variables. So let me go to my next slide here. Okay, so here's where this goes. I use Celsius metric system, but if you want to keep converting it in your head, you can see Audubon's using 1.5 degrees scenario, so 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 degrees, which is 3.6, and I really don't talk about the 2 degree one. I just do the two extremes. And then 3 degrees, which is 5.4. Now here's sometimes what I find troubling, because I think a lot of articles do focus on Celsius and some people don't convert it. So like, oh, it's only 1 degree, it's only 2 degrees, but look at how much it is in Fahrenheit. So that might be helpful for your own sake too, to understand that it's a bigger number than you might think. So what the Audubon group did is they looked at these three thresholds, and they basically, the consensus is the goal should be to hold warming at 1.5 degrees. I mean, unfortunately, we're keep increasing. So the goal is to stop it or keep it really, really, really slow. Otherwise, we really face some increasingly dire consequences, especially even when we get to 2 degrees. If we do nothing, 1.5 degrees Celsius change is imminent. 2 degrees will happen as soon as 2050, and 3 degrees would happen by the end of the century. So when Audubon made this report, they looked at vulnerability, and they looked at these three thresholds. We've already experienced an increase of 1 degree, as I said, and the Audubon group is really just using it as 1.5 as the best case scenario. It's not the best, but it's the best case scenario. Okay, so I'll let you, again, try to look at this figure here. They've listed Audubon listed these groups of birds into habitats. So you can see there's Arctic, boreal forest, western forest, and water birds, and these are actually the most vulnerable. If you notice Arctic, that says 100%. 100% of these species are at risk because they rely on the ice, they rely on this very, very cold temperature, and climate change is really the opposite of that. You're melting these ice areas. So 100% of these Arctic birds are affected. Boreal forest, if you are familiar with boreal forest, it's just south of the Arctic tundra, so it's still cold. This is also called taiga. And what this area is, it's just a dense forest of conifer trees, cone-bearing trees. You can see here, 98% will be affected. But I won't read the rest of them, but you can see the top four, how much of the percent is affected. And then the middle, moderate vulnerability, you can see about 50% or so, they'll be affected as well. The very bottom, generalist, they have, the word generalist kind of tells you that they can survive broader ranges, so that's why their numbers are not as high as the other ones. Okay, So when they look at the assessment, they looked at 2 climate change related threats. One is persistent, and persistent threat means that they permanently change the habitat. It's instant. So sea level rise, that's pretty permanent. Change in Great Lakes with urbanization, and then cropland expansion. The second is called intermediate or intermittent threat, meaning it comes here and there. So that could be something in a given year, such as extreme, maybe I can point, oops, I did not mean to do that. So you can see spring droughts might be intermittent, fire weather might be intermittent, extreme spring heat, heavy rains, and fall spring. So these, I'm kind of pointing to, if you can see my cursor, those are more intermittent, where these top 3, 1, 2, and 3 with the cropland, those are more permanent changes. So that's where you get all of these climate threats. And I know it says 9, put these 2 together. So 1, 2, and then all the other ones. And I'll start defining them now. So when we, I'll start naming some birds. So if you're familiar with the American widgeon, it's a type of dabbling duck. This is just an example to show you what kind of birds and how they're affected. That one's going to be a water bird, so it's going to be affected by lake level changes, and then they get really affected by heat waves and heavy precipitation. Then if you're familiar with the bird called the wood thrush, which I think is the most beautiful song that I've ever heard. I love that song that it sings. So if you're familiar with that one, you might be really sad to hear that it's affected. And the reason why is they tend to be affected by urban land conversion because they're losing their habitat. So you can see 2 different scenarios. One was more related to lake level water, and this one's more just it's losing habitat because of urban. One more I'll describe is the piping plover. This one is a shorebird, and it's going to definitely face sea level rise. And then the other issue is where they tend to live. I'll give you an example here. If you've been following Monty and Rose, they were found on Montrose Beach in Chicago. So this is what impacts them, high population densities of people. They choose where they're used to going, and this was a big deal this past, actually 2 summers now, I think. Chicago was not seeing them lay these eggs since 1955. So it was a huge deal to see Monty and Rose lay these eggs, and they were watching them. They were making sure, I believe at least one of the nests, the Audubon members or the scientists actually took the eggs to ensure their survival because they're about to get flooded. So you can see they were going to be impacted by water level rises. So what Audubon looked at is they looked at all these threats, and what I'll do next is just define them here. So most of them you might be kind of aware of just by the name. So sea level rise, exactly how that sounds. The sea level rise will permanently consume the coastal habitat. So I'll try to point to here so you can see what's affected. So those will just be inundated. And then my next one I'll describe here, I'll do cropland expansion. So this one's a little bit 2 parts. So at 1.5 degrees, this one is very severe for cropland expansion because it's a slight change. It's the lowest warming scenario, so that means there will be ability for more cropland use, so that removes bird habitat. But when we go to the 3-degree scenario, we actually would see less cropland use because even the crops will suffer at that high of a temperature. So it's going to be harder to produce produce for changing precipitation patterns, high temperatures, drought, and wildfires. So that's why I want to keep reminding it's not just the birds. I mean, we're going to even lose food for feeding our people. But otherwise, typical agriculture practices, they remove habitat. So that's why it's so crucial that we work with these groups like Audubon and try to work with farmers and try to manage it better. Urbanization, so that one here, oops, sorry. Urbanization, whenever temperatures rise, the research has shown that people tend to leave rural areas because it's harder to grow crops. So as more people concentrate into metro areas, it'll increase development of the land surrounding bigger cities. So again, you're hearing the trend, habitat loss. Then heat waves. So I'll jump down to this bottom one here so you can see what's more affected. In this case, I think that one kind of speaks to heat waves. So whenever you have higher heat, the younger birds in the nest cannot survive that well. Their birds are endothermic like us, or if you're used to the phrase warm-blooded, they do produce their heat from within, but the problem there is, just like we can get overheated. So whenever there's higher than normal or higher than typical heat, it's harder for these birds to manage their temperature, especially the young ones, because their feathers have not come in. All right, fire weather. So whenever there's heat and dry, that means that there's potential, and unfortunately we are seeing it a lot more lately, wildfires, a lot of wildfires. The problem is it's not the one event, it's the consistent and repeated event, because fire typically can be a good thing, especially for prairies, because those of you who know prescribed burns, it's important for some of these prairie plants to actually require the fires. Even in California, the chaparrals actually need that fire. But when it's persistent and does not allow it to actually recover, that's when it's pretty much obliterated. All right, heavy rain. So if you notice, the heavy rain is often associated over here with sea level rise. There's just more moisture on those areas. So here's the problem for this one. You have higher precipitation, rising coastal waters, and then they inundate the shorebird nests, like the piping plover that I said. They flood the burrows. So if you're familiar with some birds that use burrows like puffins, the water goes right in and washes out the eggs and kills the chicks. And I didn't mention one thing that's kind of hidden is more moisture brings more parasites like mosquitoes. So those also affect the birds. They get bothered by mosquitoes and other insects that way. All right, two more. So spring droughts, all the sad stuff. Spring droughts, so as you know, all living things require water. So I'm trying to give you a little ecology lesson here. Whenever water is going to affect the base of the food chain, the plants, you have less plants, which means less herbivores, which could be the insects. And insects are crucial for new birds and their offspring, or feeding birds and their offspring, because these birds rely on insect larvae in the spring to feed their offspring. So if you don't have birds, if you don't have water, you don't have larvae to feed the offspring, and then their populations plummet. And then in general, think about a hot day without fresh water for the birds, then they also get dehydrated. False spring. So false spring is a different concept. What this is, you probably can figure out based on the name, it's appearing like it's spring. It's one of those moments, so the definition is, it's an unseasonable warm temperature in late winter or early spring. And what it does, it kind of tricks the vegetation to grow. But then because it's too early, there's an extreme cold snap. So that vegetation that just emerged gets damaged, and then you've lost the base of the food web. So now no plants, herbivores are affected. So why it's so devastating to birds is, one, that vegetation's gone. The other thing here is birds are directly killed by unseasonably cold. They might have just come back from their tropical areas, and then all of a sudden this cold snap harms them. Then there's often, you probably hate those freezing rains like I do. You get that horrible freezing rain. It's not snow, it's not rain, it's that in between. So that's really rough on birds because it's very hard to dry yourselves off with your feathers. But think about one of your possibly favorite birds, the scarlet tanager. I mean, they're tropical birds. They might have just returned, and then all of a sudden a cold snap, and then they can't handle it. And then the last thing is insects die. So the cold spell kills insects, and that's their food source. So keep all these things in mind as I go through these here. Okay, so I want you to kind of look at this map for a little bit. Sometimes I forget I'm in my teacher role, so I feel like I'm about to quiz you, and I don't mean that. It's just my little, whenever I do a PowerPoint. So I apologize for saying study this. But what I want you to see is the color difference between 1.5 and 3 degrees. There is a pretty dramatic difference. It's kind of gradual, so that's why I want you to have a time to actually look at it. But it's darker and deeper on the breeding 3.0 degree. So you can tell that we don't want it to get that far. Even 1.5 is too much. So what they're doing is they're trying to project the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, but we hope that we don't get that far. If you look at the areas in orange and red, that shows you 87 species range could be lost. Climate change could ultimately go even higher to about 101, because what happens there is if areas, let me see if I can point, these birds here, if we get warmer, they're going to migrate more north. So the numbers actually are showing that 101 bird species could move upwards to the northern area because it's warmer up here, or cooler up here because this is too hot for them. So you are going to say bye-bye to some of our favorite birds. Okay, so what you want to see here is 98% of our lower 48 states are affected by at least one threat. So we're looking at so all those threats that I described and defined. I know there's more than 6, but they're having you see a color difference of how many start adding. So when there's 1.5, you can see there's some darker spots here. So those threats start to increase, but when there's 3 degrees, there's 5, 6 threats. So more threats start to come out, such as spring droughts, more effective fire. Maybe fire wasn't over here with 1.5, but now there's more fires and droughts over here. So really, in other words, we need to stop letting this climate change getting too high and too quickly. Let me see if I have more numbers here. At 1.5 degrees Celsius, 17% would face no threats across both seasons, and 63% would face just one. But when you go to the 3 degrees, it goes higher. Okay. 97% of species would be affected by multiple threats under a 3-degree warming, as opposed to only 20%. And again, 20% is not something we want to see either, but I'd rather, I guess if you had to choose, I do not want to see 97% of species being affected. Again, I'll let you look at here, just look how it jumps. So area percent, breeding species affected, non-breeding species. Okay, here we're looking at risk. So risk is an index that indicates which areas are going to be most critical for conservation. So you can see here, we might need to focus on some of these areas that have higher risk because of breeding areas, for example, that's really what's increasing their population numbers. So Audubon's looking at where the number of birds are in a location, the number of vulnerable species, and the number of threats. I'm not saying that you want to ignore things, but we kind of pick and choose what we might want to prioritize of what we can focus on. So maybe legislation to protect some habitat in these areas. You can see even close up over there. So if you haven't done or looked at the website, I know maybe the last thing you want to do is go online because you want to enjoy being outside and enjoying the birds in the moment. But this is a tool. This is just a way to give you an education and help be able to explain to other people as well. I always try to say the more you explain to others, you are actually creating a trend to maybe change more people's minds and change lifestyle habits. So that's what this website's about. I'm just going to briefly show it to you and then really continue to explain the report. And this is what it looks like. It's audubon.org, and they have you type in the zip code, and it's really pretty amazing. You plug in your zip code, and it tells you which birds in your area and how many can be affected, and then you click the 3 degrees, and it shows you. So I'm actually going to give you an example of that in just a bit. So I chose the bobolink. It's just one of my favorite prairie birds, and I'll zoom in on these in a bit, but this one's kind of affected. This poor bird is losing habitat pretty easily in many areas, and I'll give you a quick story in a little bit as well. But this is what it looks like. The website kind of shows you the bird, and you click whether it's current, 1.5, and it just changes the map, and it shows you what breeding range or what range is lost. So I'll zoom in on that so you can see it better. So highlighted here, again, number of threats, and they're all listed here. And notice it's pretty white here for some of these areas, darker over here. I just zoomed in more so Illinois is in view. But when I jump to 3 degrees, you'll see more threats added. So I hate saying the word only, but 3 degrees. And look how many more threats jumped. So it's not indicating which ones unless you really dive into the report, but still, it's more than what it was. I would probably see urbanization probably is a bigger one because we are having that human population just constantly increasing more and more. So that's part of the issue as well. Too many people. But we see it today. I don't want to talk about coronavirus, but unfortunately, scientists are not listened to. I wish that was not the case. Everyone thinks they're a scientist and they share things on Facebook and they're not quite using true evidence. That's really why I'm doing this presentation. I want to show the science behind it so we actually have relevant information to back our information up. Not just saying we love birds, which is true, but this is why and why it affects humans as well. Okay, so the bobolink. If you have not heard one before, try to find a call player for you. They're pretty neat, kind of robot electronic. They have these little buzzes and trills. But you can see here, that their range lost is in red, and this is at 1.5 degrees. So I didn't actually show you the current. The current was not actually shown here, but I want you to look at this color for a little bit. And I'm going to change it to 3 degrees. And you can see how much is lost. So by 3 degrees, the bobolink range is lost that much. I'll go back just so you can see. So these models are predicting what could happen. They're sharing space with humans, and unfortunately, humans are taking over. But we can do something, and I'll give you all those examples of how we can do that soon. And some of you are already doing it, which is great. So I'll give you some hope. Okay, so here, just to show you what you might have seen before, I believe this was 2014. This was just showing you that in 2014, I think they did this report, and so then they improved it much more with a lot more evidence behind it. So, so maybe you've been following this little Audubon report for a while. I believe in 2014, they said that about half of the bird species in North America lose half their range by 2080. Whereas the newer report, you can see it's a lot more accurate. They have more models, they have more data. As I said at the beginning, 140 million records, 40 data sources. And the other thing is Audubon is pretty good at being bipartisan. People know Audubon birds. In our group too, we try not to get into politics, but just showing in general what climate change is and how these species are affected. I think Audubon's a leader in that regard. I like to show you how many members and how many people love birds actually. So 1.7 million Audubon members exist in North America here, and then 47 million, these are all statistics, 47 million people have said they loved birds. So we know people love birds, and that might be related to just simple bird watching or the science behind it, or feeding the birds in your yard. I mean, if they love birds, then maybe they'll be able to do a little bit more to help them. Okay, so as a reminder, 2/3 of birds in North America are at risk of extinction from global temperature rise, but we can do something about it. Oops, I meant to show that video. I'll see if I can play it. It just pops a few little pictures for you. Some of your favorites. Okay, you have to name them all. How fast was it? All right, so here's what the website is, and this is how I'm going to finish up to basically tell you how you can help. So when you do go to the website, or simply just listen to my points here, because I don't want to tell you you must go on the internet, because that's also not always the best way. It's always to talk to people. But the website is audubon.org, and it gives you a little thing. It makes it all cheerful looking. It's like we can do this and start here. So I'm basically going to summarize it for you. There's 4 basic guides. So 1 is start the conversation, 2 is lead the community, 3 is rebuild the machinery, and 4 is to join a national cause. I'm going to talk about myself, and I'm going to show you pictures of Willow again, because that always makes you sure that you're awake here, because everyone wants to see Willow pictures. So personal actions. Start at home. Start at home. Make changes at home. And I'm going to show you pictures of my yard actually and what I've done. But personal actions will reduce your own contributions to climate change, but they also have a ripple effect. And I will give you some examples of those ripple effects in a bit. So this is my front yard at different times of the year. I'll give you a moment to look, and some of you might be able to identify these species. So this is my front yard. I want to repeat the word front yard. A lot of people are afraid to change their front yard because we're so used to what society tells us. You must have a lawn, and if you knew Keith Blackmore, he always says the 2 worst things for the planet are lawns, or actually I should clarify, golf courses and cemeteries, because it's just grass that doesn't do anything. There's no habitat there. So I'll give you kind of the short story behind this. You already heard me say that I've had, here, I'll actually show my face because it's my little personal story. When I moved into this house with my husband, within a month, we had a flood in our basement. And it was devastating. You bought a new house and you're like, homeowner, That's the best part of homeowner. You have your own home. Nope, the worst part, because now you have to deal with yourself versus when you had an apartment, you just tell your landlord. So that was a big deal. We had the basement that I'm sitting in right now. It was flooded. It was horrible. It's just devastating. And then we tried to figure out why. We kind of fixed things, and it turns out our driveway was sloped bad. So we had to get the driveway fixed, and then our sump pump was another issue. So those who may have had your driveway fixed, it's a lot of money. So they re-sloped it, but then they plowed a big trench for the water to go. So me as a plant lover and brand new homeowner did not, there were two options for me. Oh, my lawn is ruined. Or what I actually said, I have a blank canvas. I had a huge, those who've seen my yard, it's huge. I saw potential for plants. So I built a rain garden. And some of these are not actually true rain garden species. I know a little bit more now. Some of these I might have to actually move around. But I planted hundreds of plants. Actually, when I was pregnant, I would be in the greenhouse propagating these seeds. And because I had leftover plants from my Highland Earth Club, I said, I'm going to take them home. So a lot of these plants were actually, they're Willow's age. So it's kind of fun that I knew that I planted them while pregnant. And this is her garden. I like to say that. So here's what it looks like today. I took this picture on the left. So just a lot of people, oh, that's ugly. You know, it's fall colors. Maybe my neighbors, some of my neighbors may not care for our yard, but every day, this past week or so, there are 20, 30, 40 goldfinches. They're eating all of these seeds. So this is why I don't cut the tops off. There's people who think, it doesn't look good, I need to remove it, I need to make it pretty, but who are you planting the plants for? I remind myself that I'm not planting the plants for me. I'm planting the plants for nature. I get the enjoyment of seeing who arrives, what insects arrive, what birds arrive. The picture on the right with the water barrel, the rain barrel, this is today as well. So you can see my front yard has turned into the fall plumage or fall parts, and actually if you look over here, there's some aster. So I do have some color, and that's the other benefit. You can plant different blooming times of different species, so you have some color pop, but then the other ones fade away. So the orange butterfly weed that you saw over here, that's already faded, but I'm already collecting seed to give to some friends. Let me jump over here. So this is today, and I wish I had a video of it. Hundreds of bees are relying on aster. Aster is one of the last plants that continue to bloom until late fall. So when we have these cold spells that you've been having this week, you can see here that these insects are relying on some sugar. And then hummingbirds, I don't use a hummingbird feeder anymore because I don't need to. Oh, I think I lost everyone again. There we go. I found that my hummingbirds do not even go to my feeder, they go to my plants. And the plants are more reliable than the feeders because you have the sugar that can spoil, the sugar that can start having a fungus. People who don't take care of their hummingbird feeders well, you are actually causing sickness to the hummingbirds because they get this swollen tongue and they actually starve. So it's really important that if you are going to feed birds, you need to be responsible to actually clean the feeders. So I stopped because with a 2-year-old running around, I do not have time to clean a feeder. So I am actually very happy that my plants are providing the sugar for them. So then, speaking of when you build them, they will come. So I've never seen this hummingbird moth before in person, just in photos, so I have the habitat for it. This hummingbird moth is called that because it has a look of a hummingbird, which I'll put a hummingbird next. They have a similar appearance. They move about the same speed. This one's actually feeding off of milkweed here, and then the hummingbird's feeding off of bergamot. But again, I used to live in an apartment before this house, and I never had the opportunities to have habitat. We got rid of a lot of lawn to have this. You can see these are all in my front yard. I have black swallowtails, yellow swallowtails, and then monarchs. And then the biggest part of my year was I thought I have a big open backyard. So it's actually perfect for Bluebird. So I tried it. I said to my husband, Adam, put up this Bluebird house and let's see what happens. Now we did have one situation where the house bears came in, but we promptly removed the nest and bluebirds came in. So this is what I saw in 1 week of the summer. And then next few weeks I saw this. And then all of a sudden I saw Daddy feeding something. So I knew that he was feeding a baby. So I would never have had this chance if I didn't have the habitat to provide. And then just feeding, you know, if you're buying bird seed sale, you heard Gary say the bird seed sale, which actually I think your deadline might be too late. Maybe October, yeah. You might have missed a deadline to order bird seed from us, but get your bird seed from a good, reliable place and feed the birds all winter if you need to. It's really helpful for them, especially when it's very cold and frigid. All right, for this girl, this little girl who is, again, her first word was bird, and today she was pointing to, this picture was a different day, but she was at the playground and she sat on the slide to look at a ladybug. So she's choosing to look at wildlife more often than other times. She's checking out the flowers, and again, I just say this is Willow's garden. Okay, so that's the first part. Make your change at home and start a new trend. So basically, I wanted to give you some stories. So last week, literally last week, our mail carrier came to our house and he knocked on the door and he gave me a package and he said, so can you tell me about your prairie? Because I want to do this in my yard. So I just love the fact that people are asking us questions. Also the same week, I'm not lying, it was not part of this presentation. So that mail carrier story might have been on a Monday. That Thursday, we had a neighbor drive down the street and wanted to ask us about our solar panels. So people are wondering. I'd like to say I started a trend on our street. We were the first ones in our street to have solar panels, and then within the same week, or not, sorry, not the same week, but on our street now, there's 4 houses that have solar panels. So I like to believe that we started the trend to show that it's actually beneficial for that. Then you can also marry someone like my husband who works for the newspaper. I think that helps because he can write about how to improve. If you saw his last view, he talked about our yard. You can look up Adam Moderow's columns. Okay, so the next is lead your community. So connect. I'm hoping that I'm achieving that now by connecting with people who might not have shown up to an Audubon meeting before, but you were curious and you saw this on Facebook maybe, or someone shared the link with you. But show up. Don't only just be there physically, but speak. Make your case, explain, and it is not easy. I remember because of the way our solar panels were, we had to go to City Hall quite a few times to prove our case of why we should have it in our yard the way it was. So it's not easy, it's frustrating. People look at you differently. Our neighbor, I will tell you, does not like our hippie ways, I guess I should say, but I find it rewarding, and it's not about them, it's about what we can provide. And I'm gonna put a plug for a couple of groups. I don't know if anyone, a couple of them might be here today for the environmental study group. They are making big changes around the community in Freeport, and then the Northwest Illinois Audubon Society. We're celebrating our 50th year as a chapter in 2021. So I think we're doing really well, and we are leaders in the area, and I think we can keep growing to help build this. Okay, rebuild the machinery. So what I mean here is we need to change society's position in a way. So tackle the state levels, tackle the regional levels, and don't be afraid to bug your legislators. They might be so annoyed with you. I know we have one awesome member in our group, Candy Colby, if you know her. She is constantly calling, emailing legislators, and who cares? They're not here to be your friend. They're here to listen to what we want, but the more they hear from you, the better, because if they don't hear from you, then they're going to make assumptions that we don't feel this way. Phone calls, I think, are more reliable than emails, but certainly emails, fill up their inbox, and then lobby, get a group going, annoy the hell out of them, to make them be afraid. All right, and I don't think I'm allowed to because it's for Audubon, so we're not allowed to endorse anyone, but if you are aware of the candidates, vote for the candidates that are going to take meaningful steps toward curbing carbon emissions and tackling climate change. That's what I mean by join a national cause. We need to make a bigger difference, a bigger impact for affecting or protecting our future generations. Okay, so there is hope. I had a few people email asking for the link and saying, I hope it's not doom and gloom. And I said it might be a little bit, but I really feel that there's hope. I enjoy trying to do things, especially when it comes to starting with the kids, little kids, because the more you affect the little kids' mindset, they can say to their parents, hey, I think we should do something because it's my future too. So we need to protect the places that birds need now. Start with a little prairie patch in your yard. Give them a little resting spot, because I think that it helps, gives them a little sanctuary when they can't fight, especially when all they see is big skyscrapers and concrete. So little prairie patches, anything goes. If you have a small one, that's still something. You've built up a place for pollinators, and if you have pollinators, you can bring birds. Climate.audubon.org gives you some information. And then this is just something, if you like to share, it's always good because you're setting examples. So that is all I have. A lot of you probably know how to reach us, but we have excellent ways to connect with you. And you're also welcome to reply to the link that I emailed if you want more information. But I think I will stop for questions if you have any. Now, hopefully I didn't bombard you too much with the doom and gloom or too much science. I don't want to say there's any such thing as too much science. So I guess Gary will control audio and chat if there's questions or comments, I guess, because you can certainly provide it.
I'm trying to see if there's a raise your hand feature. Is there, if someone has a question? I'm going to stop the recording too. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.